Well, Spencer, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we've got a lot to talk about, and I just wanted to give you a bit of context for it, which is that basically over the last 5 years of the show existing, we've spoken to loads of doctors and neuroscientists and all about how to look after your health, why sleep's good for you, the benefit of exercise, how that impacts your brain, etc. And it's been fascinating, but I personally very passionately believe that people learn from people and people are inspired by people, and real human stories, and everyone's lives are fundamentally completely different, but no life is linear, and we all have bumps in the road or challenges that often can act as a catalyst moment to look at some of our behaviors, some of our habits, and kind of take that look in the mirror of like, are we living the life we want to live, or could we get so much more from our life? And those challenges manifest so differently for everybody, but I'm so interested to look at that, for want of a better word, journey for people, and these kind of universal challenges and therefore slightly universal solutions, but in one person's life. And so before we get into that, I would love you just to introduce yourself, because obviously people might know you from your podcast Big Fish, from your reality TV, all the different shows you've done, from yours and your wife Vogue's podcast and so on, or from your entrepreneurial story with CleanCo. But who do you feel you are?
I'm Spencer Matthews, and I'm a dad above all else, and I have. I'm delighted to be here because everything you've just said resonates so much with me. And if I can get messages out to people, it's always within those parameters. How can you do more with your life, and how can you be healthier? That's pretty much how CleanCo came about. I suppose I would love to be known as the CleanCo founder. That is what's probably most important to me professionally outside of my family, and it's where I think we can do the most good, and for lack of a better word, change the most lives or help the most people, as well as building something that I think is really cool. And it was born out of a desire to almost help myself change. Right, I drank excessively. I had a drinking problem. Whether or not I was dependent on alcohol or just had fallen into very bad habits over the years, is something that I'm kind of unclear on, to be honest. But what I think is very important for anybody is just to have a good, healthy relationship with alcohol, whether that be not drinking at all, or drinking moderately, or whatever it looks like to you. And everyone's journey is personal and different. But with CleanCo, I took the decision to become sober, and it completely changed my life. Like immeasurably different life now, and it allowed me to become professionally driven. It allowed me to develop something that I truly care about and could invest most of my time into. And proud to say that CleanCo is now the leading independent British non-alcoholic brand, and I'm looking forward to digging into that more with you. But it's just really important to me, and I love doing it.
And it's such a change, and that's what I kind of really want to pick up on, I guess, to go back to understand where you've got to today and what that process of change was like, because that's one of the other things I'm fascinated by. I think you often see almost the before and after with people, and there's a lot of shows that delve into that, but I find myself listening to them or reading about someone's story and understanding, but how did you do that? Because it might not be alcohol for someone, it might be numbing out or avoiding things and using all sorts of different other tools. But I think we all know when we need to change something, and how people actually change it, like what are the steps, what's the mindset, that's what fascinates me. But I'd love to kind of rewind a bit, if you don't mind, to your
Sure.
kind of earlier stages of life. I guess it's that moment before you realised you needed to make a change. And, am I right that you were about 19 when you started on reality TV?
Yeah, about that age. I might have just turned 20. I previously to that had spent some time in LA. I went to cinema television school out there. I wanted to be an actor. And
Why?
Why did I want to be an
Yeah.
actor? I always loved acting at school, and always loved, school plays and becoming somebody else. And, I thought I was good at it. and I've always been really into cinema, film and television. I've always loved it. And I guess also was intrigued as to what fame might be like. I think so probably the wrong reasons for wanting to be an actor. But I did love acting, right? I was passionate about acting, and went out there, and the USC, the college was fantastic, but I honestly didn't feel like I was learning much. It was a 4-year course to obtain a Bachelor of Arts degree in cinema television, and I'm not sure that would have helped me become an actor, right? So I was spending a lot of time with people. I spent a bit of time with the guys who were on The Hills at the time, which was massive. It was this huge MTV hit show.
I was obsessed with it.
Wait, okay.
Oh my gosh, I loved it. Who were you hanging out with from The Hills?
I was pretty close with Brody Jenner, and and Spencer Pratt, and we had a mutual friend called Jared, and I was spending a lot of time with them. But they were being hounded by paparazzi on scooters, and they were being paid $100,000 to go to a nightclub that they would have gone to anyway. Like I just couldn't kind of believe the lifestyle they were living.
Was it appealing?
I couldn't understand. I've always been quite financially driven, right, and quite competitive, and I've always wanted to, succeed, in inverted commas, make something of myself, be somebody, right? So, if I'm being honest, and they seemed on the surface to have it all. They were very wealthy at a young age, and this again, I think as you grow older and you become more developed and have kids, these things matter less. I'm talking from the perspective of a 19-year-old or an 18-year-old. And I just couldn't quite believe that, because they didn't have any, and I don't mean this disparagingly, they didn't have any kind of notable skill, right? Brody Jenner's obviously very good looking. That's about it, right? I couldn't quite, and by that I mean they weren't talented actors or singers, or they didn't have a skill set that could be appealing, I thought, and anyway, so I found the whole thing quite fascinating, came back to the UK, and thought that it could be a cool idea to do something similar. And a group of us pitched a show to a production company, and we'd called it The Big Smoke, to be kind of the UK version of The Hills. And we shot a pilot, and we heard nothing back at all. And I thought, right, okay, probably time to get serious. And I went and worked in finance and kind of worked my way into a position as a forward foreign exchange broker at ICAP, which at the time I thought was a very serious career. My brother was in finance, and I kind of wanted to follow his footsteps and become a serious person, in inverted commas. And then about 8 months into that, we got a call from Channel 4 saying, we're going to make the show that you pitched, essentially, but not that Made in Chelsea came from my pitch, but they had the same idea, and they wanted to talk to me because the people that we'd pitched the show to had mentioned me to them. And I went and met them and made all kinds of ludicrous demands of things that I wanted, and they granted none of them, and I did it anyway. So perfect. And that's kind of how that started. I don't think I was ever expecting it to be successful, right? I was very aware at the time that the demographic of us on that show would be almost irritating for a lot of people. But it did, it succeeded. We won a BAFTA, and it was kind of a really interesting, cool time in my life. And then it started to become less original and less fun, I suppose. Like I suppose any job does. I always saw it as a business. That show is its commodity that it trades on is drama. I'm not a dramatic person at all, and never have been. So it became boring. Always having to be locking horns with people and having fights with people. They weren't real to me. They weren't real fights. So I outgrew it and got bored of it and left.
And how did it feel being famous at that point? Because as you said, it's interesting that you'd had this kind of front row view to other people's fame that was similar in terms of this reality TV premise, and thought it looked appealing. Did it feel as appealing when it kind of translated into your own life?
Yeah, I think when you look back at it, it's, embarrassing is the kind of wrong word. You feel very famous, but you're not really, right? It's kind of like you're in a little bubble. And, at the height of Made in Chelsea, probably 1 million people watched it, and there's how many millions of people in this country? 66 million or so, 70 million. So, there's a tiny portion of the country are engaged with what you're saying and what you're doing. And an even smaller percent of the viewers are taking it in and taking it seriously. So you're actually talking to a really small portion of people. So yeah, at the time, look, it was good fun being recognized and having people pointing out car windows at you and stuff. Like, it's kind of, oh, hey, I've kind of made it a bit, but you haven't really, right? When you look back at it, it's kind of, I think any platform that you're able to create for yourself in an ideal world should be used to build something or create something, not necessarily all of the time, but that's kind of where I was with it. I wanted to leverage recognition and popularity, if you want to call it that, into being able to make something, but I didn't know what that was until I began to abuse alcohol regularly.
And what did it feel like? I know obviously it was, you know, it was on a completely different scale, but when Delicious Cielo really took off, I was 23 and I just hadn't expected it to be successful. It, you know, it was working nicely for me and I was teaching small supper clubs and workshops and cooking classes. Like it was a big online community, but it was niche and it was very, very contained. And then when our first book came out in January 2015, suddenly Delicious Yellow was everywhere. And I was doing interviews in literally every kind of media outlet in the country. And I was 23. I mean, I literally didn't have a clue. I'm kind of very honest about that. I wish I could almost go back and give that person a hug and be like, good job, like, well done for just trying. But I found that move from people talking to you to talking about you very strange. It made me feel very vulnerable, maybe because I didn't expect it and I wasn't ready for it. But I'm curious, did you feel that at any point? Like, I imagine there's a joy in a way in the recognition and this idea, as you said, that you're potentially creating a springboard for something, even if you don't know what it is, you're still creating it. But that personal exposure that you've got of suddenly people having lots of opinions on you. Yeah. I mean, I found it, obviously I had it on a very small scale comparatively, but I found that really hard initially.
But I think, I mean, we were kind of asking for that, I suppose. It's why I struggle with reality stars kind of claiming that they don't like having photos taken of them. It's kind of like, well, what was the reason behind you doing this show? Like, you know, kind of, you get that a lot. I think, and that's different for like incredible actors who perhaps are like incredibly private people. You can't argue that you're a private person who does reality television, in my opinion. So, you know, by the sounds of things, you're a private person who kind of, you know, started a brand which took off, and I think it's different, right? I do remember the first time that people were able to see us. A few of us watched the first episode together, and social media at the time was quite new, but it was Twitter, and we all had our little Twitter accounts. I think I was even at Spencer MIC at the time, and you get, you know, it was the first time ever that people in general had been able to message you directly without having your phone number or email address, you know, so that was a bit of a shock. I remember it because obviously people's opinions were mixed, right, as we kind of would expect them to be, and you'd get these, you know, really nice comments about, you know, how you look or who you are, and then you'd get these absolutely horrific ones, you know, about being, you know, a posh twat or whatever, and that's, I suppose, fair enough, you know, we were asking for it. But that was an interesting time, like the start of social media, and actually, I mean, it's completely spiraled, in my opinion, completely out of control now, social media, and you know, when people ask me about what I'm worried about with 3 young kids, I'm worried about that. You know, I'm really worried about them on social media as young children, because I think it's a really dangerous place, even for adults, right? Like, you know, a lot of people who did that show, their mental health was very badly affected by it, and having the opinions of strangers flooding your inbox all day long. You know, it's difficult for some people. I grew up with a very loving family, but quite a stern father. You know, he was a pretty hard kind of guy from Sheffield who had built it all himself, right? Like he had very little in the way of help growing up, had it pretty rough, right? And there was very little room for weakness in my house, which admittedly was lovely. You know, I'm not suggesting I've had a tough childhood, but as a kid, it was, you know, we were drilled into us the you know, any issue you face it straight up, just get through it, move forward. You know, there was no dwelling in pain or pity type thing. And I've realized as an adult now that I am a bit, I lack empathy. I mistake emotion for weakness sometimes. I'm not the guy to come to with your problems, really, so I was always very thick-skinned on that show. I didn't really care what people thought of me. And I suppose, again, with the kids, that loosens up a bit. But, it was, in my opinion, love is exactly the same thing as hate on that show. If people are watching it and they're engaging with it, great, you've done your job. And that was my job. My job was to create entertainment for people. And I think we did an okay job of it. The people who played it very safe on the show in the hope of just coming across really well weren't featured, really. It's kind of, that was just the way it was.
Yeah, so it seems like it's almost an alter ego, almost. You're going to work and you're performing, as opposed to that vulnerability of kind of fully being exactly who you are. As you said, you're kind of playing up the storylines, the drama, and it's okay, therefore, if people like you or don't like you, because that's not fundamentally completely who you are as a person that you're showing.
I would, at the end of a scene, clock off and go home and feel like, right, that's my job done for the day, and you'd go home and be yourself, right? It's kind of, so it was, and I think the line gets blurred for some people who mistake it as real, right, when it's obviously not real in my head.
Completely. And as you said, for me, the thing I worry about most with my two children, who are very similar ages, is social media. And I think it's the same conversation there that's really challenging for people's well-being, because social media is also not real. It is a very teeny snapshot, curated or seemingly real, but it's still the smallest window into what someone's life actually looks like. And I'm really interested to just pick up a little bit there before we kind of come to this moment of this catalyst moment about you saying growing up and weakness. And, I hope you don't mind me asking about it. But, obviously you went through a big loss when you were quite young. Do you feel that fed into any of this kind of desire to exceed people's expectations, to protect yourself from what people kind of felt, you needed to have a kind of harder exterior?
Yeah, I think so. But again, when Michael died, there was a pretty stiff upper lip, throughout the family. Of course, we were all devastated. I was 10, so I didn't really believe it. Like, it didn't hit me in the same way that it hit the rest of the family.
And how old was your brother, sorry?
He was 22. He was the youngest Brit to summit Mount Everest. And there were some complications, and he died on his way down. It was obviously, it was horrific for the family. But, my mum took it really well. She was devastated, of course, but she showed very little weakness, to us. She's an amazing woman, and I think it does come back to this being a strong family, and we've always put that foot forward, I suppose. It only really resonated with me that he actually was dead kind of months later, because I was still, at the age of 10, into superheroes and cartoons, and for me, Michael was my he's who I looked up to the most in the world, right? He can do anything. He's my superhero. So I was just, when I heard, I wasn't told he was dead. I was told, I was told that he, had been lost on the mountain, and I just thought, oh well, he'll come back down. So of course then, time passed and I realized, but I never had that big impactful moment where it's like, your brother is dead. I kind of carried on with my day-to-day life as a kid. I just wasn't, and of course I was sad about it afterwards. And we've recently made a project around it, which I don't think I'm allowed to say much about, but it'll be out this year.
And you went to Everest, right, for that? Yeah.
So I was on the mountain at base camp for over 5 weeks, which was
wow.
It's a long time to be at base camp. Not that I've ever been there any other time, but it's people would kind of come and go, and we stayed there for a while.
Did that kind of resurface any of the grief, or kind of an adult reconciliation with the loss in a way.
Yeah. So, I was keen to explore it a bit and dig into those feelings a bit. That, I as I said, I've kind of been void of emotion is too strong a word, but I've suppressed emotion, not just his death, just general emotion. Like as a child, the last time I said I saw a therapist about this, somebody ran a story saying that I've had, countless hours of therapy in the lead up, and I haven't actually, but I did go and see a guy just to talk about the loss, and he was fantastic. And he said, you've suppressed emotion for a long time. It's very, I don't cry really as an adult, and as I say, even if I'm presented with a tricky issue, I'll just jump straight to the conclusion of how I believe that issue should be resolved, and I'll just resolve the issue to the best of my ability quickly, with very little emotion. And I think that can be quite helpful in business. I think one thing I learned, particularly with building CleanCo quite quickly, is that the less emotion you have when dealing with stuff, particularly when things go wrong, the better, right? It won't benefit you at all to be emotional around business deals. So I guess I'm happy, in that regard, that I am that way. But yeah, the emotional arc, I suppose, of Michael's loss is explored within the project that we've just made. So I'm looking forward to that coming out.
Yeah, no, me too. It's an extraordinary thing to go back and do, and I imagine it's going to be a really interesting loss and a really interesting show to watch. I've got one question before we move on to, I guess, a little bit more of the drinking and realising that sense of realisation. But did you feel, and again, I hope you don't mind me asking, that you almost had to kind of live up to him, with him not being here anymore, that you had to kind of be more than good enough, you had to be absolutely phenomenal and exceed all expectations?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not just him. My dad is an overachiever, so is my brother. And we all do our own thing. Actually, we're not we're not in each other's businesses at all. But no, we all are competitive in a very agreeable way. But I get it mostly from James, though, and he doesn't particularly like being spoken about, so I won't touch on him for too long. But he has this incredible ability to push himself, and so did Mike, of course, until he died. And Mike was, a remarkable young climber. He climbed Aconcagua in, record time. He was a very comfortable, confident young climber. Who momentarily took the record away from Bear Grylls as the youngest, to Summit Everest at the time. And Bear's always been so kind to me about that, saying that would always be his record. And Bear's kind of almost been a kind of brotherly figure to me since then. He came to speak at our school, and I went and spoke to him afterwards, and he, has been very kind to me. Yeah, so, I grew up with my brother running, countless marathons and then the Marathon des Sables and, swimming the Oteleur and all of this, cycling across America, and just all of this mind-blowing stuff that a lot of people, including myself at the time, would just go, God, what's he getting out of that? What's the point? It's just so much to do. And he was, of course, raising money for the Michael Matthews Foundation, which was set up in my brother's name. And we look after about 5,000 kids in Africa, put them through school. We're one of the first foundations to, offer tablet schooling to, thousands of children. And we built schools so that they don't have to walk long distances to get to, a neighbouring town. And unfortunately, on those long walks, they can be very dangerous for those kids. So we feel like we're doing something nice for Michael in his name. But my brother was, incredible, but it was almost intimidating, because at the time I was very interested in socializing, going out, drinking, having fun. And he was, running the Marathon des Sables. And I was just like, I'll never be like him. And actually it was a fair amount of pressure looking back on it, because sometimes you feel like you can't compete. with people. Like you watch, David Goggins stuff, and you just go, well, okay, great, I get it, but I'm not going to do that, or I can't do that. Which is why I think it's nice to, when people are kind enough to ask for advice, say, go for a nice walk, go for a long walk, get your body moving, start running, or lift some weights, or eat well, or try and get more sleep, just kind of baby steps for some people, I think, but I ended up doing the Marathon des Sables in October just because my brother did it, and I wanted to beat my brother, and it's kind of like...
Did you beat your brother?
I did beat my brother in the end, which, but again, it's not a competition, but it kind of is a competition. It's in the back of your mind, but we get along famously, and actually, certainly more so than ever now that I'm sober. We were very different, like before. Like I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying, if, at the time that I used to drink to excess all the time, had we not been brothers, we would not have been friends, right? We're just totally separate ends of the spectrum. So I'm delighted that we have a close relationship now, and that I've become more like him.
I want to touch on, sounds like a very kind of family trait, but I'm very interested in the way you talk about these huge physical challenges actually being so empowering, because I don't think people often think about it like that. And I really enjoyed the way that you spoke about that. I think it made it feel much more motivating actually to set yourself these kind of big goals. But I totally, just to second you there, agree with this idea that I think sometimes perfect is the enemy of good. We don't try things because we don't feel we can do them as well as other people. We don't have the capacity to do it to the fullest extent. And I think sometimes with our well-being, that's one of the challenges. But just coming on to then the drinking and the decision to go sober, did you feel this kind of sense of pressure and this avoidance in a way of emotions was almost, you were channeling that a bit into kind of avoidance, and drinking as sort of one of those quite obvious tools and ways of sort of numbing out and avoiding and suppressing things?
When I had this session with this gentleman who I think is fantastic, I've only seen him twice, but the first time I saw him was for about 4 hours. It was like a half day thing. And he said what you've just said, he just said all of the suppressing emotion, all of your excessive drinking has been a way of expressing yourself in a way where you can't, sober. And look, I'm not someone that has a lot of therapy, and I'm probably not the best advocate for it, but it was an interesting conversation that we had, because I've always, with my hard-headedness, believed that the excessive drinking is just my fault, right? It's something that I chose to do. I wanted to drink. I wanted to feel that way.
How did you want to feel?
I think that my alcoholism, if you want to call it that, and you may know that I hate that word, and I can talk about that if you like, but was almost directly linked to a lack of purpose, right? So, as I've said, my brother, is this great guy who does interesting things. So is my dad, and I felt I was doing nothing really in comparison.
You just weren't fulfilled by reality TV, etc.
No, I've never been proud of the reality TV thing. As I said, I saw it as a kind of bit of a stepping stone to potentially becoming a television presenter, then realized I didn't really want to be a television presenter, and what else could I use it for? And there'd be weeks at a time where I had nothing to do, and then of course you'd get offered like other reality shows, and I did a few of those, namely the ones that you have to at least show some kind of skill to win, like The Jump or MasterChef or something where there's a point to it, right? Like I never saw the point as an example of a Big Brother or something. It's a popularity contest. I'm not that interested in people, thinking that I'm the coolest person. That I don't really care. But if I can win a cooking show, or something like that, then cool, great, and you learn things in the process. So those were, I thought, interesting things to do. But it's you can't, in my opinion, call it a career. Just being yourself and having your brand that you show on in different formats isn't a career. It's work, I suppose, but it's not. Anyway, perhaps it is a career to some people. I felt like it wasn't to me, so I felt unfulfilled. I felt like I didn't have a purpose, because the point of all those things is, I suppose, to build your name, I suppose. But what is the point of that unless you can build something, that other people can use, I suppose. I've always wanted to do that. And
I think that's really common when you're not feeling fulfilled. and you don't have this kind of clear sense of direction, that you try and fill that void with something else.
Yeah.
And those tend to be not that healthy. Obviously, in your case, it was alcohol. For some people, it could be binge eating, etc. But I think that's a very common trait.
It became a kind of like, right, well, I'm not doing anything tomorrow, so, why don't I just go and meet Tom, who's made up for the purpose of this, and drink all afternoon and have a great time. And for most of my excessive drinking, it wasn't like, I wasn't crawling home, I wasn't throwing up, I wasn't, I wasn't in a bad state. Most people that I would spend time with probably wouldn't have identified me as having a problem with alcohol, right? I know some people who, when they drink, their character completely changes. They can become aggressive. They can become, assholes, for lack of a better word. And I was never really like that, but I'd say I was probably operating at 25% of my potential or capacity. And I think in order to achieve anything or build anything, it's difficult to, you're hindering yourself, shooting yourself in the foot. And I think actually sobriety nowadays feels like far more mainstream than it has done recently. It very much was a trend before, and maybe you'll do sober October, maybe you'll do dry January. If you were sober at a party, you would be kind of the odd one out. Whereas I honestly feel like in 2023 in particular, like people are just completely awake to it, and we're seeing that with Clinco. We've had a really amazing end to the year and great start to 2023, and it feels fantastic because, I have to admit, it felt like we were a bit early. And being early and being wrong in business is pretty similar. It feels like we're certainly right now, which is great. But yeah, I think I drank out of boredom. And I've always been a happy person, by the way. Like, I've never been depressed or anxious or stressed, or I've always had what I feel to be a good nature about me, but I was bored. I was really bored. And also the addition of Vogue to my life, who is
your wife.
Yeah, my wife. Yeah, not the magazine, unfortunately. My wife is incredibly busy, can't sit down. She's the most wonderful mother. She's just like on it, and if she's not working that day, she'll fill her day full of just productive things for the kids or things around the house. She is the opposite of lazy, right? And I had become lazy in my reality TV, what am I going to do days. I would very happily just like drink and do nothing and socialize and watch TV and whatever, and just the chances of what I would perceive to be success were just becoming few and far between. Like, I was really hindering my chances. It was like a massive obstacle, this alcohol, for me to achieve anything. And it became very clear. Vogue's kind of a binge drinker, so she will drink to get drunk every so often, right? She'll go out with her friends and just like the wheels will come off, and she'll come home and require assistance for at least the half of the morning the following day. And that's fine because she does it so infrequently. It's kind of once a month type stuff, at times even less. So that began to really shine a light on how much I was drinking, because in the early days of our relationship, we would be watching a film together and I would have 2-3 whiskeys and she wouldn't drink at all, or I'd have a bottle of wine and she wouldn't have any, and she'd be like, is there any, how come you're like, did you really need another one, like just before we go to bed? And it kind of made me feel a bit like, and I don't think she was doing it intentionally, but it kind of made me feel a bit kind of like, oh, she's weird, like she doesn't drink, like everyone else I know drinks, and kind of, but then I began to think, well, actually I'm probably the problem.
Did she feel like a mirror then in lots of ways?
A mirror?
Yeah, like she kind of put a mirror in front of you and you had to really confront the person that you were at that point and the habits that you had.
Yeah, I think without Vogue, I probably wouldn't be sober yet. Or I don't know, obviously it's impossible to say. But yeah, I think I only began to realize that my drinking was unusual when we started spending a lot of time together.
Was there one moment, or was it a kind of series of moments to the point where, I know you said in another interview, there was one night you went to bed and you felt like a real loser, which is not how I don't think anyone else would have thought you were or how you were portrayed kind of at that point in your life, and you said you had all these Disney-esque dreams of being this amazing person, and there was no way to be that person with who you are. Was it that one moment, or were there kind of a few moments leading up to that big moment where you said, right, enough, I've got to make a change?
I think there are a few moments. Most notably, Vogue was away, and I was drinking on my own, and I got very drunk on my own, in my kitchen, doing nothing, right?
Yeah.
Just literally not even watching a film or anything. Just literally just sat there, and I felt like, okay, like this is a bit of an issue now, because like there was no reason for this, and like and started to play on my mind a bit. A friend came over, called, hey, what are you up to? Come round. My friend basically came round and just like put me to bed and left.
And how old were you at this point?
This was about 4.5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So, about 30. And yeah, I woke up the following morning and I thought, right, that's enough of that now. And I quit. And it was easy actually to begin with, right? Because I made this big declaration to Vogue and people that I love. Right, I'm done with this now. And like nobody believed me.
Why didn't they believe you?
Well, just because I think when you look at somebody who has a habit like that, who wants to just kick it, with no help, essentially, it can be quite difficult. Same reason, same as people who, smoke cigarettes, who suddenly just, okay, I'm going to quit on Friday. I'm all right, mate.
Yeah, my dad was a smoker, and he'd smoke like 2 packs a day, and then all the time he'd be like, I'm going to quit. 3 days later. Yeah. Right back at it. So I can see that.
I don't think they didn't believe me in a kind of horrible way. It was kind of like, yeah, I'm sure you'll do a week or something, and then we'll see what happens. And it was very clear to me at the time that without this, shift in behavior, that I could lose everything. I could lose she was my fiance at the time. And she was pregnant with Theodore, and it was really playing on my mind that, perhaps I wasn't going to be this Disney Prince dad that I'd always thought I would be. And, maybe we'll have kids and I'll be a pisshead, and, I won't be there for them, and I'll just be, the way I am right now. Back then, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So no, that began to play on my mind, and I just thought to myself, I just need to make this change. I need to do it. I need to do it for myself. I need to do it for my family. I need to see who I can become.
And am I right in saying that you redid your wedding vows because you were quite drunk first time?
I'm not sure no. So I was very, just to be clear, a lot of people were drinking quite heavily on our wedding day. We had a small private,
as is very normal
thing. Yeah, no. So I was drunk on my wedding day, but I think. I think a lot of people were as well, but I didn't make the effort for her that I should have, right? I've always been a kind of off the cuff guy. I feel like I can public speak without any notes, and always have been able to, like if somebody calls upon me to say something at a wedding, I'll shoot up and speak for 5 minutes, without having prepared anything. And that's how I treated our wedding, just like an off the cuff thing. When it's time to make a speech, I'll just, hammer it like I always do. And I think there's a big misconception with people that, drinking alcohol to excess turns you into a Superman, and it doesn't, right? That is wrong. And I was drunk at the time of giving that speech, and I can remember not quite being as quick and witty as I usually am, and like kind of struggling to find things to say. And at the time was thinking, shit, I should have made an effort here. And that was not great. But, I think it's easy to live with regret, isn't it? And, I try not to, I suppose. You dwell in regret and you use that regret to remain sober. Whereas I would prefer to use what my life could be and could become, and the positive elements of sobriety and how I can use that, right? As opposed to dwelling on the times that we've just discussed. And, how ashamed I am of who I used to be. Have you seen Stutz?
Fantastic show. Absolutely amazing. If anyone hasn't seen it, it's Jonah Hill's program on mental health on Netflix with his therapist. And it is So brilliant. We watched it at Christmas. Absolutely loved it.
Brilliant. So I watched it last night, and the shadow that they speak about, having somebody, a version of yourself that you're not proud of, you know, that drunk mess in the kitchen is my shadow. And like Jonah, you know, I've always just been ashamed of the shadow, so I've buried it and I've moved through it and I don't talk about it, and that's the end of it, right? Whereas kind of embracing that shadow and taking that shadow with you, you know, according to Stutz, who I believe is just fantastic, I think he's phenomenal, is interesting. So actually only just today I've been thinking about that drunk person, and the kind of difference that it can make to be more accepting of myself, and therefore not be regretful of the behavior. And of course, all of this led to Cleanco, which is my drive now, right? I think without being that way, I would never have had the idea, you know, to launch Cleanco, which, as I say, is outside of my family, you know, easily my top priority.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost identical to my experience, which was, you know, absolutely hitting my version of rock bottom. Everyone's got a different version, and realizing I just couldn't live like that anymore. The trajectory of my life, mine was because my physical health was so bad, but I wasn't doing anything to change it. In fact, I was almost just kind of accepting that my physical health was so bad and like leaning into it, almost doing things that made it worse because I didn't know how to get out of it, and it was changing everything overnight, completely overhauling my lifestyle. And as very similar to you, I'm not sure anyone around me really believed that I would keep going with this, that I really would, you know, go to an all-natural diet and become a yogi and, you know, meditate and all the rest of it, things I had never even considered in my life before. But I was so desperate for a new life. I was so desperate not to be that person anymore. And I agree with you that I was always ashamed of that person. I don't like the person I was when I was ill, partly because I hated being that ill, and I find it hard to look back on what a bad place I was in, but also partly because I wasn't my nicest self, because I was ashamed to be ill, rightly or wrongly. I didn't really know how to communicate with people, so I just shut people out. I was very cold at that point in my life. I don't think I was particularly kind as a result. It was a protection mechanism, but I don't think it helped anybody through it. And it was starting Delicious Yella and having this sense of focus and sense of purpose and this idea. And I don't want to sound too trite, but it's exactly what I wrote on Delicious Yella on the very first day. You know, if I can take a negative experience in my life and turn it into a positive experience for one other person as well, then it gives this sense of purpose. So I really relate to that idea. And I actually think that it really helped me continue and not quit when it felt really hard, or when I wasn't necessarily exactly where I wanted to be, because I'd made a commitment to other people that we would almost do this together. But I was really interested that you said it felt almost easy to begin with and then it felt harder. But I'm curious, almost those first few days, did you feel kind of vulnerable or exposed at all, sort of going to a party or going to the pub and saying, no, I'm not drinking?
I was really sanctimonious in the early days of it. So I would, like, on day 2, I would look at people drinking in the pub and think, God, what losers. Do you know what I mean?
They're wasting their life.
Yeah, they are wasting their life. You know, they should do what I'm doing. And obviously that's a ridiculous thing to think. But I've always been a little bit like that. It's a good thing my wife isn't here. She would say that I'm still like that. But I
understand that though. You know, I was like that a lot in the early days, but I still have facets of that in me now where I think, you know, I notice things that I do and how much better it makes me feel, and it makes me much more patient with my kids or much more energized at work. And I think, oh, I know people who'd benefit from this. And there's that difficult bit of trying to translate the experience because you think it might help others without being judgy. And I always think that's an interesting balance.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, ultimately, it was very important, as I say, that I took this decision. So, you know, as I say, for the first while, it was very easy for me just because I was so happy within myself with the decision that I'd made, and it was just time, right? Like, there's enough drinking, enough being wasted, you know, and the reality of the situation is, you know, my now wife, mother of my 3 kids, wouldn't have stuck around, right? So, you know, I had a choice to make. You know, you can choose to carry on being this waster loser, or, you know, stop drinking and see where your life can go with, you know, this amazing woman who I love. So when we put it that way, it's quite an easy choice to make. And I think for me, yeah, just making the issue, you know, the enemy for a while, just like seeing that glass of wine as the potential end of my life is easier, you know, than saying, oh, I'm just not going to drink for a bit until people, you know, forget about this, and then I'll, you know, come back. It's kind of, I describe it as a relationship with alcohol because that's what it feels like. It's kind of, you know, you shouldn't be doing it, but you do it sometimes. And, you know, it's kind of, I had a bad relationship with alcohol. I didn't even like it towards the end, you know, much in the same way that I know some people who smoke socially who don't enjoy smoking. They go outside and they have a cigarette and they come back in and they go, you know, I'm like, well, nobody's forcing you to smoke, you know.
Completely. And I think so many of us have those habits in our lives that we just don't think are helping us. And as you said, we don't necessarily always enjoy them. They're just almost sometimes default habits or ways of kind of plastering something up. Did you find other facets of your life change when you stopped drinking? Obviously, you kind of put so much into your work and that sense of purpose, and obviously it radiates how much fulfillment it's given you, which you clearly were missing before. But did it kind of help you? Did you want to look after yourself better? Did you start kind of exercising? Because it seems like all these more kind of physical experiences you've had and that pushing of yourself from a physical level, like the Marathon des Sables, that all came after you stopped drinking. Is that right?
Yes. So absolutely impossible to do anything like that with my previous relationship with alcohol. So yeah, no, firstly, it gives you a lot more time in your day, right? So like the amount of time that I would spend drinking or feeling the effects of alcohol was enormous, right? So all of a sudden I had all of this time that I didn't have before. The average Brit in the UK spends 252 hours hungover every year.
Yes, I heard you say that the other day, and
that's
really
the average
blew
Brit.
my mind.
Yeah, no, so double or triple it for me, right? So kind of like, you know, maybe call it a month of the year, maybe more. I would be incapacitated, is maybe a bit of a strong word, but you just say incapacitated for the sake of it. You know, that's a really long time to be feeling the effects of alcohol, or like, you know, in bed for no reason, awake but in bed, you know, getting up much later, you know. So all of a sudden I'm awake at 7. Cool, what do I do, right? Okay,
awake and energized.
Yeah, awake and energized and with a clear head, right? So how do I use this, you know, time that I didn't have before? And initially, you know, the new addiction became running or weightlifting, you know. And I, like, if anyone ever asks me for advice, just exercise and training is just absolutely paramount to your, you know, well-being and your mental health. You know, I'm very fortunate not to have suffered any kind of, you know, mental health problems, I don't think. So again, I'm not the best person to address those issues if you have them. But what I can say is that my energy levels are like through the roof because I train and I love training. And there's, you know, other stuff that you can do. I interviewed Eddie Hearn, who told me that he'd spent some time with Wim Hof, and, you know, if you can just have a cold shower every morning, do it. It's great. Like, it's absolutely great, right? So I have, like, I get in the shower, like, nice hot shower, like normal shower, do all your soapy bits, you know, whatever, in the comfort of the warm water, and then turn it down to as cold as it'll go and stand there for 30 seconds under the freezing cold water. You feel like, it's like you've had 5 coffees, and I love coffee. It's like you've had 5 coffees, you're so energized. And if you can just, you know, even take baby steps, just go for a walk your dog, or, you know, go for a run, even better, lift weights, do jiu-jitsu, whatever. You know, I posted something today, actually, I just saw it was such nice, simple advice. You know, some guy's doing a podcast with some other bloke that I'd never heard of, some American guy, and he just says, do you have any advice for, you know, men who feel that they're, you know, getting older? And he just said, yeah, lift weights, go running, stop drinking alcohol, do jiu-jitsu and stretch. Simple. And it's true, I happen to do all those things, and it's kind of like you do feel better if you are an active person, and, you know, you have a nice diet, and you don't just eat rubbish all of the time, and you do go running and you do get some fresh air. It's like, it makes a serious difference to like your work ethic. And also, like, if you can just get it done in the morning, you know, so many people, I don't have time to train. That is rubbish.
That was what I wanted to pick up on, because to your point about the being hungover and losing time, I think I'm curious if you felt you kind of almost made excuses for yourself, like, oh, I don't have time to do this, I don't have time to do that, because I think that's such a normal process. And even if it's, being hungover is not the challenge, this idea that we don't have time, I think and look, we've not all sat in everyone's shoes, and I appreciate that, but I think it's such an interesting excuse as to why we can't do things to improve our health. I feel so passionately about this. We know that, just as you said, like something small, 10 minutes of exercise is proven to change your brain. Like, it is proven to improve your mood. If you struggle with stress, like breathing for 10 minutes is proven to lower your stress levels. But we always say we don't have time to do it. But then most of us are spending like an hour a day on social media, or, we've all watched the latest Netflix show and, all the rest of it. And I just think it's a really interesting one in terms of prioritizing yourself.
You've got to put yourself first, right? Like, even if so I used to work at ICAP, as we've touched on. I would have to get up at 5:45 to get to work on time, right? And then I would leave work at 6 p.m. And often would have to entertain clients after work until 2 a.m, right? Like, we would go for dinner, and then they would want to go out, and then they would want to go to a nightclub. And it's kind of like, that my drinking was awful at the time, and you were young, so you'd want to do it anyway. But I was operating often on 3-4 hours sleep, like every night, and doing it every day. And it's like, even I had time to train. You go in your lunch break or whatever, right? So I don't really care if you're Jeff Bezos or somebody that doesn't have a job. Like, I think if you're not making the time to put your physical and mental well-being first, you absolutely should be.
I totally agree with that. And I think, as you said, like, small is better than nothing. And that's the idea of making perfect the enemy of good. I know I did that when I had my kids, in a way, because I'd always given a lot more time to my wellness. And I'm much more of a yoga person than a marathon disabler person, but I'd go to class pretty much 7 days a week, and it was like my medicine. It kept me feeling physically and mentally like my absolute best. And then I had a baby, and I had another baby a year later, and obviously you just don't have that level of time anymore. But I used that, not having that level of time, to almost not do anything. And then I started doing 20 minutes before they woke up, and I was like, wow, I feel like I've got 80% of the benefit of this, and it still works in my life. And I think it's hard in that perspective that most of us can find 10-20 minutes, even if we can't find the rest. But I've got 2 questions for you. First of all, do you feel, and by the way, I don't think this is a bad thing, because I also have a very addictive personality, and it took me a long time to say that, because my dad's got a very addictive personality, and I didn't want to mirror all of my dad's qualities, to be honest. And so, but I find sometimes I have to be honest that I have to move, like when I was ill, because I didn't want to recognize I was ill and I was stuck in that hole. I became so addicted to like fizzy sweets and things like that, because I was like, I was really comfort eating. I was kind of avoiding where I was, and I had very, very bad heart palpitations, and they would be infinitely worse, obviously, because my blood sugar levels were all over the shop. And when I gave them up, I was like, I have to give them up completely. Like, I'm not someone that can have one. Yeah. Sounds like you're quite similar. And I moved a kind of full focus into my health and into my well-being, into yoga, into cooking, etc. And I find that really helpful, because I am admittedly a very all or nothing person. It seems like you almost have to move your addictions from one thing to another. That's maybe a healthier addiction. I know you've got very into jiu-jitsu. Am I right in saying you're a jiu-jitsu master? And then you've done a lot of physical challenges.
I'm a master in the sense that I'm old. So kind of like, I think your age,
a blue belt.
But your age categories are defined. So I'm a masters 1, okay. Which means that just means that I'm over 30, unfortunately.
Don't tell people that. It sounds amazing.
No. So yes, I'm a 2-stripe blue belt, masters 1 category, which just means that if I were to ever compete, like Tom Hardy, you're in a masters category. So he's a masters 2 because he's 43, I think, or 44. So that has no bearing on your skill set, unfortunately. Although being a master at anything is
pretty cool,
very cool. Yeah.
But do you feel you've almost moved the addiction into like intense exercise? So I heard you saying on one podcast, like, what's the point in running a marathon? I'm going to run 6 marathons in 5 days, and it's extraordinary.
Well, I'm sorry to have said it in that way, but yeah. So I think for me, having a kind of big, audacious, unachievable goal almost is more exciting and interesting than doing something that I know I can do. And I find it, I think, certainly in my latter years, understanding that failure can be really beneficial to your growth is important to me as well. I would have said that, failing is what I'm most frightened of, whereas I think, I'm sure there have been failings in Deliciously Ella, just as there are in CleanCo and, in our personal lives as well, right? It's just a normal thing to build upon and become better. So I signed up to the Marathon des Sables because it's the toughest foot race on earth, which, by the way, I'm not sure it actually is, but it's called the toughest foot race on earth. And I wanted to test myself in a way where I was unsure if I would be able to finish that or not. That was more exciting for me than running another marathon, which I think, at this stage of my life, I know I can do. It's not that big a deal, for me, right? So I think, but if you haven't run a marathon, go and run a marathon. I think it's a great thing to do. But the desert thing was just really intrigued me. I was really interested in it because my brother had done it, and I'd read a few things about it, and I found it a fascinating challenge, right? But one that only became interesting to me when I became sober. So before I thought it was reserved for the mentally unwell, right? People who ran that race. You get there and it's a great experience. It's one of the most cathartic things I've ever done. I loved it. I mean, of course there were moments of extreme pain throughout it that you didn't think perhaps that you could pull through, but then of course you pull through it, and that is awesome, right? And it's an amazing feeling. Finishing that race, I had feelings that oh my God, when I finish this, it's gonna feel just so great. And you finish it and you're literally dead. You have no feeling at all. You're not joyful. You're just done. You're over it in a pretty major way. But then I was sat on the plane with my medal, flying home, and I really felt like that if I can do that, I can do anything. And perhaps that's not true, but that's the feeling you have. You kind of feel like don't know if you ever watched Dragon Ball Z, but you kind of feel like a Super Saiyan. Nothing can get in your way. And I remember going back to the office afterwards, and you just feel let's do more. Let's the aim with CleanCo has always been to be the best non-alcoholic brand in the world, right? Great. To get there, you've got to have far more managed expectations, but the view from the very beginning was always to be a big, global, phenomenal business, and that's just the way I am.
And you have to push yourself personally in order to feel like you can push yourself professionally, it sounds like. I really like this idea because I think a lot of us are scared of setting big goals or big tasks or, possible achievements for ourselves because we're scared, as you say, of failing. But I think this idea that maybe even if you don't get to the end, you've still achieved more than you ever thought you could achieve. Yeah. You're showing yourself physically and mentally you're so much more capable than you ever thought you were. And obviously that then's going to seep into every aspect of your life, isn't it? It's not just because you can run 6 marathons in 5 days in 40-degree heat, which is extraordinary. If you can do that, to your point, what else can't you do?
I very nearly failed on the second day, right? So there was a stomach bug going around camp that got everyone, basically. I mean, it was just rife, this thing. And it got me on the second day. And you got a lot of people on the first day, and, you could just see these people kind of throwing up, in the first mile of this 250, kilometer thing. And you just thought, oh my God, you just thought they're going to have just the worst time. And of course, people were dropping out because it was making you very dehydrated. And you're very dehydrated anyway in that race. And I got it in the second day. And I collapsed in the kind of dunes. It was a really awful day anyway. And it was only possible to move at, a very slow pace, and any water that you had, you just regurgitated. And that day was the day when I sat down and I was just okay, I'm just not gonna but then you think, I'm in the Sahara desert. I'm miles away from kind of civilization. I've flown the whole way here. I've told loads of people that I'm doing this thing. And it's kind of and you're sat there going, if I pull out, I'll regret this forever. And I'll feel like I've just wasted my time, done all this training for no reason. And more importantly, disappointed lots of people that have sorry, what's it called?
Sponsored
me for the Michael Matthews Foundation. I just sat there and kind of just collected my thoughts for about an hour and just thought, nope, gonna just crack on with it. And that, you know, you get to the end of the first day, you get second day, you get some food in you, you feel less ill, you rest, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I made the right decision, right? And it's kind of like, I think, you know, unless you push yourself through these uncomfortable barriers, you know, you're very unlikely to grow as a person, I feel. You know, I think, you know, I did a poor Bear Grylls impression the other day, you know, on one of my stories, and finished it off with "Comfort is the real killer," which is, you know, something that I feel he would say, and I was kind of taking the piss at the time, but it's actually, it is, right? It's not taking the piss. I think comfort, being very comfortable with your goals and being very comfortable with your diet and being very comfortable with your, you know, physicality and stuff is, in my opinion, not as good as pushing your comfort levels and being slightly outside of your comfort zone and trying to achieve things that you thought weren't possible. Because if you are able to do it, you will feel phenomenal. And it can be a tiny, simple thing like, oh, I'm going to go running tomorrow morning. Open the windows. It's raining. It's wet. It's cold. I'll go running, you know, some other time. Go running anyway. Just get out there, get cold, you know, do it, come back. The shower will feel so great, and your day will have been kicked off in a far more productive, awesome way than had you decided to just get back into bed. And it's actually like, you know, we're fine here, you know, particularly if you live in London. You know, the conditions are never going to be anything like they can be, you know, in some of these challenges. So just push yourself.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. Do you feel really proud of the person you are today? Because the person we were talking about at the beginning of the show, kind of 19, 20, 21-year-old you know, obviously you really put yourself out there. And as you said, sometimes when we push away these shadow parts of ourselves, we're actually not embracing the fact that they might not be the person we're most proud of, but they've still got really amazing qualities, you know, the tenacity of trying to get the show off the ground, of the vulnerability and confidence in yourself to put yourself out there is amazing. But still the change you've been through, clearly, particularly in the last 5 years, is, you know, it takes a huge amount of resilience and digging deep on a regular basis to keep going. And, you know, you've obviously, sounds like you've done extraordinary things kind of personally and professionally in the last 5 years. Do you feel quite proud of that?
Yeah, I mean, candidly, yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't really know.
I think you should.
I don't really, yeah, I mean, if you look at it compared to where I was, you know, 5 years ago, then yeah, of course. I think I've got a really long way to go, right? So I'm nowhere near where I want to be. And there's lots of, you know, I think my kids are quite young. I'm really looking forward to kind of, you know, growing a bit older with them and hopefully instilling in them, you know, really strong moral values. And, you know, being a great dad, I think is you know, if you can be, is really important. But also, you know, we've got a really long way to go with Clean Co. And I think the project that we made about Mike is really beautiful. So I can't wait for people to see that. And I just think that, you know, it's always a work in progress, right? Again, comfort. You know, I don't want to get comfortable. I want to continue to push boundaries and continue to grow and continue to, you know, do my own thing, I suppose. But I feel that, you know, more recently, taking a step outside the comfort zone and talking about alcoholism for the first time really recently has been, you know, incredibly well received, which is great, you know. And again, I was talking to somebody else yesterday, and I said, you know, had I come out with these quite strong messages against the word alcoholic and, you know, likening alcohol to cocaine, you know, like publicly, you know, on a public forum, would have been really risky, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. You know, I'm not sure people would have bought that. Whereas now I feel that, you know, there's an awful lot of support around all of this. And I feel like for the first time, what I'm saying might actually make a difference to some people. And that's a great feeling. And I really want to explore that more in 2023. And kind of be potentially a bit of a voice for people who perhaps feel like they do drink too much and they'd like to have another look at that relationship with alcohol, but without, you know, labeling themselves an alcoholic and going to AA. And, you know, I think you need to be a really brave person to go to AA. And I think admitting that you're an alcoholic, in inverted commas, is really difficult for lots of people. You know, loads of people who are on paper alcoholics will never admit to being an alcoholic. And I actually think that word is really detrimental to people who may want help and advice but won't seek it because they're not willing to identify as an alcoholic. I just think it's really dated. And like, I get asked all the time, so were you an alcoholic? And it's like, well, what difference does it make? Like, you know, I don't drink alcohol anymore. So like, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't, you know, what who cares, essentially? You know, like I personally think and I think it's different to alcohol dependency in, you know, people who, you know, have issues, you know, around alcohol who absolutely, you know, need the help and, you know, can't do it on their own. But I think there's probably millions of people in this country that could help themselves, you know, with, you know, just a bit of good, honest advice that they might perhaps not otherwise receive.
I'd never thought about it like that, but I really, really agree with you. And I think it extends past just alcoholism. I think there's often this need to define things and put things in boxes and give things very big labels is quite unhelpful to making changes and to moving forwards often to where we'd like to be. Because as you said, that, you know, they've got lots of kind of connotations attached to them. They're not necessarily connotations people want to attach themselves, and that's more than okay. And I think it's that sense of kind of compassion and being having a bit more space to have an honest conversation with ourselves without having to say, I am an alcoholic, I will never have a drink for the rest of my life, as opposed to, as you said, you know what, I think I'm not where I want to be. Maybe that's personally, maybe that's professionally. I am avoiding things, you know, I am wasting facets of my day at the moment. I want to look at where I'm not going wrong, but where I could do things differently. You know, and drinking too much may often be one of those challenges, maybe spending too much time scrolling Instagram as opposed to doing something you want to do, being scared of failure, being scared of putting yourself out there. I think as soon as you put them into boxes and labels, as you said, it becomes quite different to address them, which is very interesting.
Well, it's like, you know, the NHS, and by the way, I'm definitely not knocking the NHS. I think they're the most, you know, they're fantastic, you know, particularly through COVID. But, you know, some of the things are just a little bit outdated in my opinion, you know, so on paper, you know, the NHS claim that if you drink 14 units of alcohol a week, that you're an excessive drinker. That's 5 pints of lager in a week. Like, I would do that at lunch, you know, and it's kind of, and obviously I was an excessive drinker for real, but I can't see how 5 pints of lager in a week makes you an excessive drinker and alcoholic. That's the same as kind of, you know, 5 or 6 glasses of wine. You know, you're essentially then saying that, you know, the majority of people who drink alcohol in this country are excessive drinkers. And that can't be, if you were to say that to people, like, you're an alcoholic because you drink 5 pints, you know, that's a ludicrous thing to call somebody, right? I think alcoholism, if it is negatively impacting your life and your productivity and your drive, and you're unable to train and be fit, and your diet is rubbish because you drink too much, and you hate your job because you're constantly feeling, you know, upset with yourself, and your relationship with alcohol is bad, then address it, right? You don't need to label it, I don't think, as being anything other than what it is, which is, you know, perhaps a temporary you know, problem that you might be going through in your life. And I don't know, I think the going to AA thing in particular is very final, right? It's kind of like, all right, whoa, he's in AA, wow, like he must be a really bad drinker. And I don't know, I personally just feel like there must be some other way of getting, you know, across to normal people who perhaps will never identify as an alcoholic.
Yeah, it also puts you in a box, doesn't it? You know, if you've then gone to an AA and you decide 10 years later you've got a really healthy relationship with alcohol, but you would like to enjoy a glass of champagne at your sister's wedding, then you've failed. And I'm always really wary of anything that's completely all or nothing, because we all have chapters and moments where some decisions are right and they might flex and they might change. And I think we've got to be gentle on ourselves that that's okay.
That's why, you know, I call myself sober, because I don't drink alcohol. being teetotal or being sober forever is a huge task. I don't know what I'm going to be like when I'm 50 years old.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what I will have gone through or how comfortable I'll be. You know, and I just think, you know, right now, because it's been 4.5 years or whatever, if I was to suddenly say, hey guys, I'm going to have a gin and tonic, everyone would go, oh my God, like,
Yeah,
oh
he
no,
quit.
oh
Yeah.
no, you know, like, is he okay? It's like, well, yeah, you should have worried about me before, you know, like, obviously I'm fine. So I think it's all a bit, and that's you've hit the nail with that being the problem. I think once you announce that you're sober, you're setting yourself up for failure, you know. And I think all this alcoholic sober, you know, people should just strive for a really great relationship with alcohol, whether that be not drinking at all or drinking a little bit or drinking heavily. I know people who are alarmingly happy, successful, great people who drink wine or whatever every single day, like, and not one glass either, and it doesn't slow them down or get in the way at all. Like, on paper they're an alcoholic, but, you know, the way of looking at it should just be, but they're happy, and that's how they are, and they're comfortable, so let's not label them an alcoholic.
Right, everyone's completely different. And so it's just my last question. What do you do every day to look after yourself? You know, are there any daily-ish habits that you've got that really make a difference to feeling like you're getting the most from your life? Obviously, not drinking being very much one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I avoid alcohol. Which I think we might have touched on. I meant, look, I mean, I've spoken to people with really extraordinary kind of like daily routines and I'm not quite sure how, you know, comfortable I am with whether or not that makes any notable difference to their kind of mental well-being. I try and get some exercise every day. I try and eat well, you know, but obviously we you know, also have pizzas and chocolate and, you know, whatever. I don't think you put yourself under too much pressure to constantly have a great diet. I'm honestly loving the cold shower thing. I know, again, it sounds like a bit of a cliche thing, but just try it. Like, I honestly think you'll love it. I got my wife to do it the other day. She absolutely hates cold water. And she felt brilliant afterwards. Just really wakes you up. And then just having a kind of good, solid working relationship with kind of key people, you know, in your team. You know, I rely on a lot of my top team for, you know, their expertise, but also just general advice with the business. I think being busy, for me, again, comfort being the killer. You know, I have to be busy. If I have 3 hours of nothing, I'm like, my head spins. I just need to be kind of focused with stuff. At the moment, if we're allowed to plug something, I interviewed these two guys who are amazing. They call themselves the Mushroom Brothers. And they have a brand called Dirty. I don't know if you know it.
I buy their the mushroom cacao powder and make hot chocolates with it every single morning. I just saw your interview with them on Big Fish. I haven't listened to it yet.
No, so I've been drinking lion's mane with my kind of coffee, and I actually like. I'm all for. I love independent brands that are doing well. I always prefer that to kind of some big mainstream brand. But I feel fantastic. Like, I've been drinking their stuff for, you know, maybe a week, and I feel just fantastic. And I don't know if I would feel fantastic anyway or not, but like I feel great. So I don't know, just and then obviously spending time with your kids, you know, every evening. I just love. They're at the age where, you know, they're kind of a joy to be around. They can communicate now, so everything's, you know, a great big joke. But love doing bedtime, and, you know, I'm very fortunate to be, you know, madly in love with my wife, right? So we spend a lot of time together as well. We're not the most social people, so
neither are we.
We're at home kind of a lot when we're not working, and, you know, it feels really great. I feel, you know, really lucky, blessed, you know, however you want to look at it, I suppose, to be to have the relationship that I have with my wife. You know, I get a lot from her. She's, you know, very driven, very hardworking, and just great, you know, just very happy.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for being so honest. As I said, it's the aim of the show is to inspire people and empower people in their own lives and their own experiences, and they're all different. You know, lots of people won't be on a reality TV series, but I think we can all relate to this idea of feeling unfulfilled, lacking in purpose, and sometimes filling those with habits that aren't doing us that well, and being really honest about what those habits are and then making that change. And I think what's so inspiring is seeing that making that change, it sounds like you've become the person that you thought you were losing and that you couldn't be at that point that you made the change. And I think, yeah, that's what I hope to do, to show that people can inspire people. If you can do it, we can all do it. So thank you.
Long way to go, but thanks a lot.